So, on behalf of the American Sephardic Federation Institute of Jewish Experience and the Rabbi Arthur Schneier International Program of Yeshiva University, we are really excited today to have a little bit of a different New Works Wednesday. It's kind of a historical fiction, and yet it's very visual, so it kind of makes for a fun Zoom session, I think. The book is called José and the Pirate Captain Toledano, and you can see it's a graphic novel if you go through it, and then you can see it online as well. It's based on the pirates of the Caribbean, not the ones you're thinking of, the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. And I'm sure they'll get into it later, and if not, I'll make sure to ask some pointed questions afterwards. In the meantime, I'm just going to tell you who's with us today. The author and the illustrator, that's a giveaway. But Arnon in his bio, Arnon Schorr in his bio talks about how he's half Sephardi, half Ashkenazi, a Hebrew speaker in America, a Jewish private school kid in a mostly non-Jewish suburb. And I love that because that's so much of what we are at the Institute of Jewish Experience. And that's part of our Reclaiming Identity podcast series, is the concept of, I want to be who I am. And it's okay that I'm the other because I'm still part of the larger mosaic. And so that's another real reason that we're really pleased to have you with us today. So thank you. And Josh didn't put that in his bio, but we can say anyway, I hope obviously you have some pride in your identity. Let's go back to Arnon for a minute. He tells stories that embrace the peculiar and the other because of constantly feeling like the other. So it's an interesting kind of play there. And I think a lot of us that are here today and more that'll come in feel that quite often. It's kind of part of it and kind of not sure where we belong. And you'll see that's José's as well. Josh Edelglass's work has appeared in publications including Tikkun Magazine and the New Haven Review. His artwork has also appeared in numerous exhibitions, including POW, Jewish Comics Art and Influence at the Brooklyn Jewish Art Museum. And he has watched Star Trek II more times than is probably healthy. Everybody has to put in something fun, right? And you will see in the follow-up email how to get in touch with either one of them and how to follow them, because there will be many more things coming, I'm sure. And you didn't come to hear me, so I will hand the floor over. I will be stalking you in the background. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Drora. And thank you, of course, to the American Sephardi Federation and all the sponsors. Josh and I are really excited to be here. And so I guess we've been introduced, so I don't have to go through that. We can skip right ahead to introducing what the book is really about and a little bit about where it came from. Because this book has a kind of an unusual story behind it, in that, I mean, you've heard about movies that are adapted from books. This book started out as a short film. Back in 2017, I released a short film that I wrote and directed called The Pirate Captain Toledano. And it played roughly 50 film festivals around the world, including places where there aren't that many Jews. We'll get to why that's important. It's a film about Jewish pirates, and it's the first, and as far as I know, it is still the only time that Jewish pirates have been depicted in on-screen fictional media. So it did really well. And when I told people I was making a film about Jewish pirates, the assumption was that I was making some sort of Mel Brooks style comedy. But really, I was inspired by a different source material. I had recently read this book, Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean by Ed Kritzler. It's a fascinating exploration of what might have been the role of Jews in Caribbean piracy in the sort of early centuries of European colonization of the New World. And I thought that the history was fascinating, but what really intrigued me as a filmmaker and as a storyteller is that normally pirates, the way we experience them in media, they're depicted kind of like this. They are greedy, immoral thieves with a lust for adventure who hoard their gold and bury it in places. And, we've heard those stories many, many times. But the thing about Jewish pirates, at least the way that Ed Kritzler describes them, is that they are motivated by something very, very different. The suggested history is that they were refugees from the Spanish Inquisition. They fled Spain, they fled Portugal, they took to the high seas in order to get away, and took to piracy as a means of survival, and as a means of vigilantism or revenge in a way. At the time, Spain was the maritime superpower. So if you're going to be plundering ships, chances are you're plundering Spanish ships. And a lot of the money that paid for the Spanish activities in the Caribbean, in the New World, was plundered from Jews when they fled Iberia. And I thought that idea of pirate characters, fictional pirate characters who had a motivation that was different from anything else I'd seen in pirate movies or pirate literature, opens up an entirely new set of potential stories for what is otherwise a very well-worn genre. So I started to put together this short film. And as I was putting it together, as I was raising money for it, I encountered another important reason to tell this story. And that has to do with how Jews are depicted on screen. By and large, in American movies and American TV, which is the media that is consumed more than any other nation's media around the world, we are depicted as pale-skinned European, Ashkenazi, either opaque religious figures with the peot and the black hat, or as secular and very angsty Holocaust survivors or descendants of Holocaust survivors who have more psychological issues than a therapist could possibly fix. And these can be really interesting characters. They can be very compelling characters, and there's a place for these characters. But again and again, Hollywood tends to hit this same two notes when it comes to the way Jews are depicted. And the trouble with that is that when people see this, I think they assume this couldn't possibly be the whole picture. And they're right, it isn't. But unless we provide more of a picture to them, they fill in the gaps themselves. And I saw this when I raised money for my Jewish pirate movie. At the time, if I Googled Jewish pirates, what came up was Ed Kritzler's book and a few articles about it. And then very quickly, what came up was anti-Semitic blog posts. So here we have this very rich story that we could be telling about ourselves, but since we weren't telling it, other people were, and they were usurping it to their own ends. So I felt at that point that the film was almost a necessary thing. The story was a necessary story to tell, because I had to start filling that gap for people. And with a lot of the stories that I tell now, I try to incorporate Jewish characters that fall outside of how Hollywood defines us, in order to try to broaden the palette of what it means to be Jewish, in at least the way people see us on screen. So the result was the film. As you can see, it did very well. 50 film festivals all over the world. And remember, I mentioned that it played in places where there are no Jews, places like Titovo, Macedonia, or a little town in Utah called Helper. Which means that there were people in these places who didn't really have Jews to interact with, who were curious, who were interested in experiencing and exploring a story about Jews that fell outside of the Hollywood stereotype. So it worked. when I was able to attend screenings, there was often a Q&A at the end. And at that Q&A, invariably, the first question anybody would ask after watching this 10-minute film was, where's the rest of the story? And of course, I would tell people, all right, well, if you pull out your checkbooks, I'll make the movie. And after a nervous chuckle, everybody understood pirate movies are expensive. But it really got me thinking, how can I tell a bigger story? How can I tell more of this? And I thought about different ideas, different ways to approach it, came up with what the rest of the story would be. And that is when I happened across a Facebook post that Josh Edelglass had posted. He and I had known each other since college. Not since college. Well, yeah, just about since I was in college, a little after. I had taught film classes at the summer camp where Josh works. He was the guy who brought me in to teach those film classes. And he posted some illustrations he had done. I didn't know that he did any illustrations. And it got me thinking, what if we do this as a graphic novel? So I will let Josh to continue the story from there and tell you a bit about how the book came about.
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh. It's my great pleasure to be with you all. Thank you, Arnon. So this is where I entered the story. As Arnon mentioned, we had known each other through Camp Vermont, New England. I'm the Scott Menahel, the assistant director of Camp Vermont, New England. I've been working there for over 20 years, and I'm also an illustrator. So I have these two separate halves of my lives, which sometimes when I'm lucky enough, I can find ways that they can, those two halves can connect. Arnon and I got to talking, and we both very immediately, I think, sparked to this idea of bringing this fuller story to life, expanding the short film into a graphic novel. I love comics. I love graphic novels. I have ever since I was a kid, and even more so today. To me, comics is almost an untapped potential. Particularly in the United States, many people think of comics and graphic novels in a very narrow way, a very sort of narrow genre of the Marvel, DC, superhero sort of things. But comics is a media, not just the genre. And there is incredible work that's being done and incredible opportunity. I think there is a magic in the combination of words and pictures. There's both a potential for simplicity and great complexity. And I think it's in the magic between that simplicity and complexity that can happen in comics that, for me, is what makes comics and graphic novels so exciting as a storytelling media. And for me personally, as somebody involved in Jewish education and somebody involved in illustration, the idea of telling this story and telling a story that was really about something that was about Jewish representation, that was about, as Arnon was talking about before, not just the cliche type of Jewish representation that we see so commonly in American media, particularly television and film, that was very, very exciting to me. So Arnon and I began this journey together after that fateful phone call several years ago now. We spent about a year putting the basic proposal together. I began my process by illustrating just a few scenes. It was 5 sample pages. Basically, I illustrated 1 or 2 scenes from Arnon's short film. We put together a pitch deck with character synopses and descriptions of the whole story. We connected with an agent, and then eventually we connected with a publisher. Once we had the publisher, then the time came to create the story, and we started by designing our hero, designing our main character, and that is Jose. There were several fun challenges involved in creating who our main character was going to be. Number one, I'll point out that the process of turning Arnon's short film into a graphic novel resulted in a bit of a shift of focus. The short film is called The Pirate Captain Toledano, with the pirate captain being the main character. The Jose character is actually not even named in the short film. He's just referred to as the stowaway. Our graphic novel is called Jose and the Pirate Captain Toledano. Toledano is very, very important, our pirate captain, but our main character who takes readers through the story is this young boy, Jose. And before I started illustrating the 100-page graphic novel, we wanted to be sure that we had a good design an identity for our character, Jose. On the slide here, we see several, this is just a very small sampling of the many sketches and designs that I did, and Arnon and I had a great back and forth as we were trying to find the character. You can see in the color image in the corner, the original character design, that is from the original 5 pages that we did. Before I started illustrating the full graphic novel, that was in our original pitch. And in those 5 pages, I basically just drew the actor who had appeared in the short film. That actor's a little older than Jose is in our novel, and a little bit of a more sort of a cliche pale skin look. Next to him, you see our final character design for Jose. We really wanted to have the hero in our children's book be somebody who's not the blonde-haired and blue-eyed hero, who's somebody who's not the sort of the more stereotypical, more cliche Ashkenazi Jewish look. We wanted this Sephardi young hero. And the key in the design for us, and I think, again, this is the magic of comics, but also the potential complexity, is that when you have storytelling that is, there is I mentioned the simplicity to comics a few moments ago, the simplicity and complexity together. And we wanted to, and we need a design that was both iconic, but not stereotypical. And again, in simplifying and having complex ideas at the same time, that's a tricky balancing act. And in our design, before I started drawing the pages, we wanted to be sure that we felt very happy about our hero, Jose. Once we had the hero Jose, then we turned to designing the larger world. And here too, for me as an illustrator, this was great fun. Arnon had created a very strong visual sense in his original short film. But that short film was only a few scenes. Our graphic novel, 100 pages, had many more characters and many more locations. And there was a fun design process as we were creating the pages to flesh out that world and to try to balance a world that is historically accurate, that also gave some room for me as an artist to have some invention, to have a little bit of a whimsy. I wanted to find a style that was eye-catching, that would be friendly to all ages. This is a middle grade graphic novel, and we wanted this story to work well for kids, and it was very important to both Arnon and I to not be limited by that, to not feel like, oh, this is a story that's only for kids. We really wanted to create a story that would work for all ages. And finding the right art style that, again, balances that simplicity and that complexity was very important to us. You see here just a sample of my basic process. That would probably be a whole nother talk, but basically, in short, I go through several different steps to illustrate one page. I pencil the page, and that's the chance where I can really rough things out and be very free and loose and try different things. Once I'm satisfied with that basic pencil layout, then I would ink the page. And that's when, using ink, the thick, dark black ink, I really refine the page. I tighten up the drawings. I get everything looking really exactly the way I want it to look. At that point, I work with watercolor washes over my ink. I do most of my work not in the digital realm. I do most of my work on paints and pen and inks on paper. I really like there's a certain texture and a certain look and feel that I think work that's created by hand as opposed to digitally has. And then there's the fourth stage, which is not here, which is in the digital world, which is putting all the pieces together, adding the word balloons and the text, making art corrections there in the digital world to create the final page. Getting back to designing the world, we wanted a balance, like I said a moment ago, of historical accuracy with some room for some invention. But that accuracy and having the thread of that, we wanted the world to look and feel real to the readers. And to do that, there has to be a basis in historical accuracy. And specifically, when we were thinking about the story and thinking about some of the key props and images that would appear in the story, we wanted to be sure that we weren't just making that up out of whole cloth, but that really there was a basis of reality to that. The KIDDUSH cup, which is a major part of our story, is a good example of that. And let me pass that back to Arnon, who can tell you that story.
So first, let me just give you a little context, since I imagine most of you have not yet read the book. Before the book, in the film, the story revolves around a stowaway who he's a Jewish refugee from the Inquisition. He stows away on a pirate ship, and the way the captain of the ship finds out that he's Jewish is that as he's being dragged off, his bag spills out and a Kiddush cup clatters across the deck. And the captain picks it up and recognizes it for what it is, because it turns out the captain is also Jewish. That was the very, very core of the story that I initially came up with for the film. And we kept that in the book. And actually, the Kiddush cup plays for much longer in the book, has more of a prominence in the story. I came up with that concept. I was inspired to that concept by a Kiddush cup that I received on the day of my wedding from my grandfather. It had belonged to his grandfather. This is my grandfather on my father's side. So this is the Eastern European side of the family. And you see it in this black and white photo here. I received that cup from my grandfather, who was not observant. There had been a break in the chain of tradition. So I received it not knowing what were the melodies, what were the tunes that my great-great-grandfather might have used when he used this cup. And so I wanted to create a story that has this prop in it that, and a kid who's received this thing, the kid doesn't know what to do with it or how to use it. And it's this older character, the captain, who's able to recite Kiddush for him, who's able to teach him what this cup, what this object is all about. When I was getting ready to make the film, I invited some actor friends that I knew to my apartment to do a table read. This is when we sit around the table and they perform the script just seated at a table. It's a great way to hear how the dialogue sounds, to hear how the story flows. One of those actors, his name is Stephen DeCordova. I'd worked with him before. He read the script, he came over, and he brought a Kiddush cup with him. He had read that there's a Kiddush cup in the script, so he figured he'd bring a prop. It was a surprise to me. I thought, well, that's kind of cute. Turns out that Stephen DeCordova, who I knew as a secular Jew from New York, who is now acting in TV and movies in LA, his mother was born in Kingston, Jamaica. His family fled Spain in the 16th century and came to what at the time was called Port Royal, which is now Kingston, and had been in Jamaica for hundreds of years. And the Kiddush cup that he brought to my house was actually an authentic piece of Caribbean Judaica. It had belonged to his grandfather, and for more generations than anybody's can track, it had been in his family. And that is this Kiddush cup here on the right in the image I'm sharing. So it was as if he had reached into my script and pulled the Kiddush cup that I had written about out of the pages. It was a really special moment. And Stephen let us use the Kiddush cup in the film. Here you see a shot of it, from a still from the film on the left. And so, of course, when we wrote the book, when we illustrated the book, I provided Josh with dozens of photographs of the Kiddush cup from every angle I could possibly get. And that way we were able to authentic prop in the book and maintain to real history. The neat thing for me about all of this is that Stephen's Kiddush cup and Jose's Kiddush cup in the story, they speak to a deep theme that runs through the film, the book, and our experiences of telling the story. And that is that there are two different things that can be passed down from generation to generation. There are artifacts, physical objects, and there are traditions. Jose's cup in the story is an artifact. He receives it from his father without knowing quite what it is or what to do with it. And it's very likely that without some external involvement or interference, if he's so lucky to have kids, he might pass it on to them, and they certainly won't know what it is or what to do with it. And that was kind of the case with Stephen's cup. The last time it had been used for Kiddush was probably his bar mitzvah. And then, he recites Kiddush in the film. We had to kind of teach him how to do it. But in those intervening decades, the cup was ornamental. It was sitting on a shelf. And it really kind of, to me, speaks to this idea that artifacts without traditions are cold, dead objects. And so in the film, and especially in the book, we have a story that reminds us that it's, like the pirate says in the movie, he says, it's not about the gold. our survival is not contingent on our stuff, but on the ideas that we preserve and the traditions that we maintain. And of course, on the stories that we continue to tell. So there we have it. That's the story of the book and the Kiddush Cup. And Drora, if you would like to open things up for questions, that's our presentation. Oh, you're muted. There you go.
I'm back. Okay, so first, tell us a little, you kind of said that you heard about the pirates. Can you tell a little bit about how you heard about them and where your interest started in them?
Sure. It started with a Shabbat meal at a friend's house. And he said, hey, I just read this book, Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. It's really fascinating. I'd never heard anything about Jewish pirates and actually had learned very little about Jews in the Americas prior to, the British colonial era. I'd learned a little about Jews involved in the American Revolution, things like that. But anything earlier was not really part of my education. So I read the book, I found it fascinating. And I immediately thought, oh, there's got to be a movie here. There's got to be a way to tell this story on screen. But it took a long time before I found a story that was achievable. As an independent filmmaker, I do not yet command millions of dollars to spend on big swashbuckling adventures. So I had to come up with a story that was small enough and contained enough that I could tell it on at a scale that was fitting for the story, and that was achievable, that I could raise enough money for.
Thank you. I know that Carolyn had a question.
Yeah,
And we
I'm
can put that
unmuted,
back up
but I
again.
don't know where
No, you're fine, Carolyn. I just want to stop sharing screen so we can
I
see.
can-
I encourage you all, please do open your cameras. I am inviting you to open them. So I'm going to invite you one more time. But in the meantime, Carolyn, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I'm interested in how this fits in with other things I've read about the history of piracy, because there's some place that, I taught history for 37 and a half years. One of the things that I read is who is a pirate, and a pirate depends on what your point of view is and which country you're from, because the kings of Europe would commission pirates in effect. They said if you see an enemy ship, you're supposed to attack it and get your pillage from it, particularly Spanish and English, and it was part of war. So it wasn't just people floating around trying to survive, but there was an officiality to this. So can you describe how your pirate story fits in with this history of Europe?
Sure. So what you're describing, if I understand it correctly, is the difference between a pirate and a privateer.
Yeah.
A privateer has a letter of marque, an official document from a government that says you are free to plunder from our enemy's ships, and we will not prosecute you for piracy if you do so. Historically, it seems like a lot of Jewish piracy, at least according to Kritzler and historians who agree with him, was in all likelihood much more privateering than pure piracy. Most of them seem to have some kind of affiliation with a government that was opposed to Spain. But there are pirates, there are privateers, and then there are fictional pirates. And part of where I'm operating is in this world of mythology, not necessarily in the world of history. I want to acknowledge history. I want to ground my stories in some historical context. But fictional pirates are a whole separate category. And fictional pirates, historically, have been, like you described, out for the plunder, the greedy individuals or groups that were prowling the seas to take whatever they could get. And for me, the thing that stands out with Jewish pirates and the potential in fictional piracy is that Jewish pirates can create a whole new category of fictional pirates, or a whole new subcategory of fictional pirates who operate with a very different motivation than the typical fictional pirate does. But I think it's an interesting distinction, and it's a distinction that some people really latch onto when it comes to Jewish piracy, because there's a discomfort with some people. Some people are very uncomfortable with the idea that Jews could have been pirates. You get similar pushback when people talk about Jews who were gangsters or criminals, that there was a Jewish underworld at a certain point in American history, certainly. But there's a little bit of a sense of like, oh, we shouldn't tell those stories. And those people tend to be a little bit more comfortable with, oh, if there was a letter of marque, if there was some official sanction, they were operating on behalf of some government, then it's really a form of warfare. But to my mind, I think it's really important to tell all of these stories so that we fill in those gaps and expand the diversity of Jewish narrative in books and on screen. Because if we don't tell these stories, other people will, and they will not necessarily tell them in a way that is flattering to us or kind. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. And you were, one of the things that you were talking about.
Mute. Okay.
Oh,
Were there Jewish pirates involved with the Dutch East India Company and the Dutch West India Company? Because there were Jews involved in this. Were there actually Jewish pirates that were involved with these companies?
I don't know.
Right, that's something we can ask next time Aviva Ben-Hur comes. We can ask her because that's her specialty. Or here, it's in the book. That's the book that they referenced before. That's where it all started. It's a fascinating time in history, and like you said, I mean, it's great. Let's focus a little bit on the difference. And I love that Jose has a relationship with the Native Americans around him, and he talks about a tribe understanding difference. Did this come from personal? I mean, like in your bio, you felt like an other. Did that need to put this difference in play into from a personal point of view? And Josh, did you have something also that it related to you? Or
I can certainly, speaking for myself, difference was always a part of my identity. I was always different. I came to the US when I was a year and a half old, but we didn't settle in a big Jewish community. We settled near one. I went to a Jewish day school where almost all my classmates were from the big Jewish suburbs, and I was not. Most of them were Ashkenazi. I was not. Most of them were born in the United States. Most of them, their parents, and in many cases, their grandparents were born in the United States. Mine were not. There was a lot of difference in my upbringing. And I always grew up understanding difference as something to be celebrated. I think probably of necessity, because I could either choose to celebrate it or be really ashamed of it. And I've always gravitated towards stories where difference is somehow valued, where it becomes an important thing, where it becomes something to pursue, something to embrace. And in this case, a community of difference is something that Jose is looking for, a place where he can be separate, where he can be different and still be part of something. So yes, that figured heavily into this, and it figures heavily into a lot of the other stories that I tell.
And that was what Arnon is just describing was a key piece. I think back to our very first phone conversation talking about the project when Arnon was first telling me about the short film. Those aspects of the story was what attracted me to this story right away. And in the graphic novel, there's a key moment where one of the characters tells Jose to find your tribe. And I really loved how in Arnon's story, there's the different levels to that, right? That there's the level of the tribe that you're born into. And in the story, Jose discovers his Jewish roots and at first is very disconnected and resistant to any sort of connection to that. And over the arc of the story, finds that connection. But then there's also the tribe that is your found family, not the family that you're born into. And I think many of us have that experience, certainly myself. There's that family of friends that becomes your tribe. I hope everyone on the call is lucky enough to have that group that they can really feel a part of. They're not family by birth or by blood or by heritage, but they really are family in terms of how we're living our lives. And Jose learns to find that family as well. And so those two layers were something that spoke to me right away from that first conversation.
Right, there is something about finding your family, building a new family, and I love that. I can bring that in. I have other things to talk about, but if somebody else wants to interrupt, please let me know. Raise your hand if you're opening your cameras. Oh, yes, please. I don't see your name, sorry.
I wonder if this pirating was a full-time occupation or if it was more opportunistic, and if these privateers, pirates had some other businesses like trading between the islands or between the continents. Or is there anything known about this?
Again, without being a historian, I can't speak on this with too much authority, but certainly some of the notable characters in Kritzler's book had other professions. In some cases, they were merchants, and so the professions were in some ways compatible. One notable, interesting character, Samuel Palace, was the president of his congregation in Amsterdam. He was the shul president when he was not at sea plundering Spanish ships. So I'm sure there's a lot more kind of interesting stuff to learn about these characters, but the study of Jews in the Americas, and specifically Jews on the oceans in this era, is relatively new. I'm curious to find out more as the research dives deeper to learn more about who these characters really were. But again, I'm not a historian. I make stuff up.
Thank you.
Sure. It's good to see you.
Good to see you.
I don't know if you mentioned this and I missed it. Can you tell us a little bit about the name of the ship, the Lachish?
Sure. Josh, do you want to field this one?
I'll let you take it. Then I want to say something about the design of the ship afterwards.
Okay. So there is a Talmudic figure, a rabbi named Reish Lakish, who in various interpretations was some sort of a bandit or a pirate, or he had some sort of nefarious existence, and then became a rabbi. And so I thought, well, it makes sense to me that a Jewish captain of a pirate ship would name his ship for this figure. Apparently, there were Jewish ship captains who named their ships for Queen Esther, for example. So there were Jewish ship names in this era. I don't think there was a real ship named Lachish, but it just seems to make sense.
They were one aspect of the design process that comes to my mind in this moment is that Arnon and I exchanged quite a number of sketches about the image on the front of the ship. I had this notion that I think is probably not historically accurate, but that the ship named after Reish Lakish might have almost like a pirate version of Reish Lakish right at the bow of the ship, which I thought sort of graphically, visually would be a fun little hidden egg in the drawing, but probably not so historically accurate.
I'm trying to see if I see the front of the ship.
On the cover, you can see it.
And in a couple shots here and there. It's not, we don't.
I do want to point out also, as an educational institution, it's important for me to point out that there is a full educational resource packet that goes together with this book, and there are some wonderful questions for discussion and some visuals there as well. So I don't know how people can get a copy of it, but
it's available through the Carbend website, and I'm sure we could also provide the direct link. Putting together that education guide was almost as much fun as creating the actual book. And we really did try to, throughout the process of creating the graphic novel, to weave in these layers, I guess you would call them, of references to names, references to various, psukim from Torah or Tanakh at different points in the story. Again, for sort of a Hamevin Mevin situation, that for, younger readers who might not be familiar with that those details might wash over them. For older, more sophisticated readers, those details are there. And they're also hopeful, we hope that this is a book that could be read more than once, that those we wanted to embed. I think great stories have those layers that, okay, the first time I watch something or read something or experience it, I'm experiencing this layer. But then I think the great stories, when you do that multiple times, you discover all these other layers. And in the education guide, it was fun to go back through and really pull those out and highlight, one could have a whole conversation about this concept, this rabbinic concept, or this pasuk from Torah Tanakh. Looks like Arnon has just dropped the link in the chat.
I will send it out tomorrow with the follow-up email. So
Great.
Thank you. So that was that. The other thing, again, just because I'm coming to it as an educator. So one of the things we always talk about is how you have all these voices in your head and outside of your head, talking at you, talking to you, talking in the background. And I don't know if you could see this visual. I should have probably shared it as a page, but I don't know. Just the concept of all these people talking, and he has to try to make sense of all of it, and the differences. And it doesn't necessarily mean. I think the visual here is just as powerful as the words themselves, as all these people talking at him and to him. And I think it's one of the things that I related to, at least in the story. So
we actually created a short video just about the creation of that specific page. That was a really fun page to create. In that moment, for those who haven't read the story, Jose, the Inquisition has discovered Jose and his father. Jose has fled. He's stowed away on what he will discover is this ship, the Lachish, that is captained by a Jewish pirate captain. In this moment, Jose doesn't know that. He just basically knows that he's lost everything. He's alone in the bowels of the ship. And Arnon had written in his script very beautifully this idea that we really wanted in this moment, all the experience that had led Jose up to this moment to be swirling around his head. And we had a fun back and forth of my doing some sketches, Arnon giving me his feedback, my doing some different sketches to try to figure out, what's the best way to bring that to life visually on the comic book page. I'm really gratified that page spoke to you. Thank you.
I just dropped a link into the chat of the YouTube video that Josh and I made about this page in particular. So after this, maybe you can include that in the email as well when it goes out to everybody. And to me, the thing that's exciting about this page is that when I wrote the comic book script, I'm describing in words what I expect to see on the page. This was a page where I didn't know what we should see. I knew what it should feel like. I knew what it should express, but I didn't know quite what should actually be there. So when I wrote it, I basically wrote to Josh. I said, here's what I want this to evoke. And then I let Josh come up with ideas of what it should actually do, how to do it. It's part of what to me is a really special aspect of this kind of work, is that it's not just storytelling. It's not just me telling a story. It's storytelling collaboratively, where, Josh and I really are individually necessary to the way this story comes together.
Right. That collaboration, I think, for both of us was really wonderful, and really just made this, it took many months, years to bring this book from conception to publication. And I think that aspect of collaboration throughout was wonderful for both of us. And it's also, I think, that page is an example of, there's many similarities between film and comics, that both are media that do combine images and dialogue. In film, it's audio, and in comics, it's written. So there's overlap, and there's also a lot of differences. The media are quite different. And Arnon as a filmmaker, myself as a comic artist, it was a lot of fun to bring both of our different perspectives to the page, and hopefully have a best of both worlds result. That was the goal anyway.
You have a comment or question?
I have read the book and I found you have both done excellent work because it really keeps the tension and gives the story. And I found it actually even more impressive than the film.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I love that word tension because that was something that Arnon and I spoke about a lot. And Arnon, as the writer, really seized upon the idea of, that what's the last image or moment on each page that's going to get you to turn that page in an excited way to bring you to the next story. And that was something that we both, Arnon as the writer, myself as the artist, we both spent a lot of time really thinking about, and we tried to be very intentional in terms of how we were structuring each page of the book. So thank you.
You have done excellent work.
I
Thank you.
definitely agree.
And how do we get signed copies, please?
Signed copies. Let's see. Next time I'm in Los Angeles at the same time that you are, I can certainly arrange something.
I don't know if you want to wait so long.
We could probably
Anyway,
figure something out offline.
thank you.
Thank you so much. I thought this was a lot of fun. So I wish more people would have opened their cameras, but that's okay. Thank you for those who did open your cameras, and thank you for participating. And thank you for sharing with us. And I do encourage everybody to go read the book. And like Josh said, more than once, because it's the second time you see all the things you missed, and the third time. And let's continue talking about our identity and our pride in our identity. So again, through reclaiming identities, through next week, actually, Rabbi Dr. Sharon Shalom is going to talk about his book, which also talks about his identity as an Ethiopian Jew coming to Israel, and understanding that Judaism in Ethiopia was a lot different than Judaism in Israel, and how do you understand the two? Just quickly, you got a lot of thank yous. I just want to make sure there wasn't anything there. Yes, you may share the recording. It will be coming to you tomorrow in the follow-up email. So yeah, everybody will have the link, and please do share.
And I will add to that, if you read the book and you like it, please do tell more people about it. Those reviews on Amazon and on Goodreads are very, very important, very helpful for new artists like us, for new authors like us. So review the book, give it 5 stars, hopefully, on Amazon, on Goodreads, tell your friends, and help spread the word.
Definitely.
Thank you so much for having us. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you both. Have a great rest of your day, wherever you are.